And they all learn the same thing, and it's all wrong. They're not uneducated, they're miseducated. I said, okay, if the smartest people in finance got it wrong, the whole thing must be wrong. So I spent 5 years studying physics, applied mathematics, network theory, graph theory, complexity theory, a variety of fields to understand what was wrong. And I found it. I discovered what was wrong. That didn't take too long. What did take longer was, okay, this doesn't work. What does work? How can we understand capital markets? And this is where I kind of part ways with Nassim Taleb, the author of The Black Swan. I got to the same point he did, and I've never read his book, of course, and I was like, yeah, you're right about the bell curve, but we don't have to throw up our hands. We have to keep trying. And so then I spent another 5 years developing these models. And interestingly, around the same time, I was recruited by the CIA to help out with counterterrorism because there was insider trading in advance of the 9/11 attack. That's obvious. The last 2 trading days before 9/11, there was 286 times the average daily volume of put buying on American Airlines. You know, when you buy a put, it's a bet that the airline's going to go down. So that's like statistically, that's like a guy who orders a sandwich for lunch every day, and then one day he orders 286 sandwiches. Well, you know it's not him. You know there's something going on. And that's been well studied. And what the CIA said is, okay, I mean, it wasn't their job to run that down. That was the FBI and the SEC had to go find the bad guys there. But what the CIA said was, okay, if there were another spectacular attack being planned, a 9/11 style attack being planned, would there be insider trading again? Could you detect it? Could you trace it to the source, get a FISA warrant, break down the door, break up the attack, and save lives? And we answered all the questions. We said, yeah, there will be insider trading. You can spot it. You can't. We built a system to detect that. But in the course of doing that, I learned statistical techniques that I wasn't familiar with as a lawyer, including Bayes' theorem, sometimes called causal inference, and complexity theory. Well, the more I got immersed in that, the more I realized that that could be applied to other things. We were using it for counterterrorism, but it could be used for predictive analytics in geopolitics and predictive analytics in capital markets.
Right, and the theory is that there's enough people involved in this attack and some of them are greedy.
Correct.
Or maybe someone that overheard them are greedy, and so the information gets out and somebody wants to play some bets.
That's exactly right. And I actually, within the CIA, I encountered a lot of skepticism when I outlined this methodology. They said, oh no, you know, the terrorists would never compromise operational security by doing insider trading. This is a complete waste of time. And I said, look, nobody's saying Mohammed Atta on his way to Logan Airport to hijack the plane stopped off at Charles Schwab to put in a few trades. That's not what happened. It's your point, Brian, that these terrorists operate within a social network. Everybody has a mother, father, sister, brother, cousin, neighbor, safe house operator, driver, etc. And some of those people are greedy, cannot resist the impulse to bet on a sure thing. So I had a 2-word answer whenever I encountered this skepticism. I said, Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart was a legitimate billionaire. Martha Stewart made $1 billion legitimately. She was a very successful business person, but she ends up behind bars on a $100,000 trade. If you're a billionaire, why do you care about 100,000? But people cannot resist the temptation to bet on a sure thing. Right. So the trading does happen, and then once it happens, you can spot it. Just to be clear, she didn't actually go to jail for insider trading. It was related to an alleged insider trade, and I think there was some other kind of cover-up, just to be fair to her. But it was definitely, it involved insider stock trading, even though that was not the precise conviction. But she ended up behind bars for 100 grand, basically. But what I'm doing now is using the same techniques that I studied or learned at CIA, and that we actually built. We built this system. And then using it on my own to basically do forecasting and geopolitical forecasting and forecasting in markets.
Okay. What are you saying about the global elites? Are they doing certain things before this crisis as far as stockpiling cash, doing certain things with their trades? And are they doing this because they know better, or are they conspiring with each other? And what can we learn from what you know?
Great. Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy in the sense that there's, you know, a small group of Illuminati wearing hooded robes sitting around a mahogany table. But the way it does work, and I talk about this in the book, first of all, it's not a secret. We know who they are. It's Christine Lagarde, her first head of the IMF, her first deputy managing director, David Lipton, professors like Larry Summers and Ken Rogoff at Harvard. So it's a collection of central bankers, finance ministers, academics, think tankers, and public intellectuals, and several hundred of them around the world who collectively run the international monetary system,
Right.
because they either run the central banks or the multilateral institutions, or they're in and out of finance ministries, or they have a lot of influence. So that's who they are.
They influence 90% of what happens.
Or more. Exactly.
Okay.
They're like-minded individuals. They don't need top-down organization because they all agree with each other. They all went to the same schools. They went to Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Harvard, Chicago, Stanford, like 6 or 7 schools in the whole world. They all went to them. In many cases, they were each other's PhD thesis advisors. You know, Stanley Fischer is the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, former MIT professor, a little older than the rest. But Stanley was the thesis advisor to a lot of the other central bankers. So they're not only like-minded, they taught each other. And they all learn the same thing, and it's all wrong. They're not uneducated, they're miseducated. In other words, the models that they have taught themselves, that they perpetuate and that they're teaching to the younger scholars, are at best obsolete, and at worst dangerously flawed in ways that are setting up the system for this new crisis that'll be worse than the last two. So they're in control. They're like-minded, so they don't need a lot of coordination because they all think alike. They've got badly flawed models, and they never see this coming. So are they trying to wreck the system? No, but they are wrecking the system through their own kind of ignorance and misapprehension of the statistical properties of risk. Meanwhile, they are smart enough to know what we're describing, which is that this is going to happen again. They can see it coming. They don't actually understand why, but they know that nothing got fixed in 2008. One way to think about this, Brian, is that the dynamics and the mathematics of a financial panic are exactly the same as the collapse of any complex system anywhere in the natural world. So earthquakes, volcanoes, forest fires, various phenomena, avalanches of this kind. They're not just metaphors. I mean, I use them as metaphors in writing, but they're not just metaphors. The dynamics are identical, but with one difference, which is in a man-made system, you can truncate it with policy. In a natural system, you cannot. So when an earthquake starts, what's an earthquake? An earthquake is a release of energy. That's how you define and measure an earthquake. When an earthquake starts, you can't stop it. Like, you can't stop an earthquake in the middle and say, time out. But if you could, imagine if you could, what would happen? That energy would be unreleased, but it would still be there. The pressure would be there building up. It just didn't get released that time. Now bring that over to the man-made systems. There, when the earthquake starts, when the release of energy starts, you can truncate it. So you have dominoes falling, boom, 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 boom. You know that the last one's going to fall unless they drop a steel wall between two dominoes. Now the domino hits when the next one doesn't fall. That's what they did in September of 2008.
Right.
They dropped a steel wall between Lehman Brothers and Morgan Stanley didn't fail, but because they guaranteed every bank deposit, money market fund, and currency swap in the world.
When they should have let it fail, or nature would have let it fail?
Well, they should have let it fail. Now, I don't think we should have allowed ourselves to go into something worse than the Great Depression. There was a solution on the table that they never pursued because of cronyism. See, now we're getting into the gangster side of it, the cronyism side. So what they should have done, by executive order, and the legal authority was there, they could have nationalized all the big banks. Not permanently, because I'm not in favor of socialism, but temporarily nationalize them.
And cleaned them up.
What you do is you wipe out the equity. First of all, you rip out the bad assets and you put them over here in trust for the American people. So it might take 20 years to sell them, but whenever we sell them, that money goes to you, the taxpayers. Over here, we now have a clean bank. Equity, you're wiped out. Bondholders, how big's the hole in the balance sheet? 20% haircut, 40% haircut, whatever it takes. Preferred stock, you're probably wiped out. Put the losses where they should be. Put the losses on the people who deserve it, which are the stakeholders in the institution. So now you get rid of the bad assets, you wipe out the equity, you now IPO a clean bank to raise new equity, and you start over with Citibank and Goldman, all these guys private, with new owners and clean balance sheets, and we can get the economy moving again.